Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Stellar Rae podcast. Today I am so excited to be joined by Dr. Laura Gallaher. She is so amazing and just has so much knowledge on so many of the topics that we talk about over here. And today we're going to be really focusing on self-acceptance, which she is a total expert on. Basically, as we were just talking about before the show, how self-acceptance and self-growth do not have to be two isolated frames of mind or lenses in which we are living and viewing the world. So, Dr. Laura, thank you so much for joining me. And why don't you give us a little introduction?
Yeah, happy to do it. Thank you for having me, Stella. So my background is organizational psychology. Ever since I picked up my very first psychology textbook, I fell in love. I didn't even want to sell the books back at the end of the semester. I became such a geek about it right away. And for me, it was because everything I learned in psychology, I felt like I could pretty immediately apply back to myself. And that felt so fascinating. Wait, we can apply science and actually improve our lives because of it? How cool is that? Anyway, and that's my dog who wants to participate in the show right now.
No worries.
Deep apologies, everybody. There's somebody in the backyard here who's taking care of the pool, and the dogs feel like they have to protect it. All right, cool. My fiance's handling it. So sorry. So I actually started my career working for NASA. And I don't know if you remember, Stella, the Columbia accident that happened in 2003.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it was one of two shuttle disasters that NASA experienced. And, a lot of people think about the Challenger accident that happened in the 80s. Mm-hmm. I was quite young for that one. I don't actually remember it, but this one was almost 20 years later. So in 2003, Columbia was the shuttle that was lost on reentry. And so the investigation looked into technically, what had happened, but they said NASA's culture was as much to blame for the accident as what had happened from a physical perspective.
Oh.
And so you would think, okay, so NASA had a bad culture, disengaged employees, overbearing managers, but that actually wasn't the case at all. In fact, NASA had just been rated the #1 place to work in the federal government just a couple months before the accident happened. And so it raised really important questions about, well, what is culture then? And really, you can have maybe a good place to work, but that doesn't mean that you're truly effective. So I ended up being hired because of my background in organizational psychology to come in and work to help transform and enhance the culture at NASA. And specifically, we were really looking to develop psychological safety. So teaching the leaders about this construct and how can they do that? How can they ensure that there's open flow of communication? Because there were people at NASA that were concerned about what happened and were trying to alert people that this could have been catastrophic. So there's communication breakdowns there and ultimately not enough psychological safety to save the astronauts in this particular case. So that's how I got started with everything. But I became really obsessed with this idea of self-acceptance when I'd been there for a couple years and I was doing one of many 360 assessments. Have you ever done one of those where you get the anonymous feedback?
So.
No,
I don't think so. I'm intrigued.
They were they're really popular back in the day. I actually helped bring them in. I have all kinds of opinions about them now, but so, I was getting feedback from my internal customers, from my leaders, from my peers, and then also from the people on my team. And I remember sitting there during a lunch break and I was at a leadership training and I had this 30-something page report and I'm getting pretty good feedback. But then I turned to this page where my respondents were asked to indicate how often they ever experienced me exhibiting negative influence tactics. And there were a couple people on my team who said they felt like I would sometimes bully them intellectually.
Oh my goodness.
That was my reaction. Just jaw drop, gut punch. What? I was horrified. I was so horrified. I don't know what my face looked like, but I met with my assigned coach later and I was telling her how awful this felt. And she was like, oh my God, I saw your face in the lunchroom. It was hilarious. So I don't know, she was laughing at my pain. But, and it was actually really hard. I'm laughing about it now, but it was such
Yeah.
a humbling experience because, here I am, PhD in psychology. I am this internal consultant and coach who's been brought in to, consult and teach these leaders how to create psychological safety. And I was struggling to do that for the people on my own team. And so it hit me then, I think, how much it's not enough to know. It's not enough to know these concepts, to know what psychological safety is. I had, like all humans do, these gaps in my self-awareness and, more importantly, gaps in my self-acceptance. Because I can promise you, Stella, I never went to work at NASA and said, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to bully some people intellectually. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
was never my goal. And I was able to figure out through a lot of different development work and introspection that actually self-acceptance gaps that I was experiencing, for example, if I am fearful that somebody else is questioning my competence, right, that will trigger my fears around incompetence. It's actually the story in my head that they're even questioning my competence. They might not be. It's my projected narrative. And if that triggers like deep insecurity and deep self-judgment and self-criticism, I'm going to hide that from myself and I'm going to react in a very defensive way. So instead of like calmly engaging in a conversation where I have a different opinion from somebody, I might get a little bit more worked up. I might have like a particular tone, like I get like a little bit triggered, right? And all of this is in my subconscious and it's all tied into these like self-judgments that I have of not feeling smart enough or persuasive enough or whatever it might be. And so from that point, I just was like, okay, so self-acceptance is where it's at. Everything in life becomes easier when you can choose to let go of self-criticism and self-judgment and lean into self-acceptance. So that's how it started for me, like becoming obsessed with it. And there's like way more that I can say about it, but I wanted to share like my personal, somewhat embarrassing story, I think, of my realization of the importance of this construct.
Yeah, totally. How long after that moment in the lunchroom and talking with your, was it supervisor or?
Yeah, like my assigned coach.
Yeah, how long
Yeah.
after those moments was it that you put it together that self-acceptance was kind of the next thing? Like, was it kind of like quick, or did you kind of have to go on a journey to realize that?
This is the part where I show you, I literally have the word journey tattooed
Oh
on my
my
wrist.
gosh, no way.
Do.
That's so
I'm
funny.
telling you, Stella, I was like, we are like two sisters from another Mista or whatever. Like,
Yes.
we're so aligned.
That's
Yeah,
so
I got
funny.
the journey tattoo on my inner wrist about 6 years ago. Because at that point, I'm well over a decade into my professional career and like learning about self-acceptance and self-awareness, and I just kept finding new levels. As soon as I felt like maybe I've kind of like figured this out, then something else would boil up for me. So anyways, yeah, very much a long journey, one that I'm still on. It wasn't immediate following that leadership training. I really struggled with accepting that feedback. Like it hurt, and I think it hurt because I could feel how it was true. And I think what I went through after that was a bit of letting things sort of crumble and fall apart in order to then rebuild. And I think that crumbling and like rebuilding process from that example probably took a couple years. Not gonna
Yeah.
lie. Like it was a couple
Yeah.
years because it was one of the first times that I felt like my self-concept really got rocked. And I think in the time since then, because it's probably, that was, I don't know, like 13, 14 years ago, maybe, I've let it happen more and more. And I've realized like, this is just part of it. Actually,
The
like
crumbling.
my own image, my own self-concept, like letting that sort of crumble and build something different. That's just part of the growth process. It's kind of like when you're building a muscle. Like if you don't work out hard enough to actually tear the muscle fibers, you're not going to increase your strength because it's tearing the muscle fibers and them regrowing back together that actually makes the muscles bigger and stronger. And so when I realized that that's just part of life, if you are wanting to grow and you're willing to introspect on your growth journey, then there's a continual process of letting go of things that I previously believed and held on to and building up something different in its place. And that actually the more fluid I can be in how I see myself, that represents probably the highest level of self-acceptance there is. Like not getting overly attached to anything about my identity or who I am. All of that ego stuff that can be threatened and feel so fragile.
And how would you even define self-acceptance? And I know this is what I mentioned at the beginning, what we kind of talked about briefly before, but how self-acceptance may differ or may somewhat be similar to, you know, these things we hear a lot, especially on social media, of self-love and
yeah, self-esteem and self-worth
self-esteem,
and
yeah. All of it.
I know, and I love all of the concepts really. So let me talk about the difference that I see between like self-esteem and self-acceptance. So imagine for a moment that you have this circle that represents like who you feel you are today. Like that's your self-concept, like the I am. If I asked you to identify, you know, who you are today and probably include in it things that you like about yourself, probably some things you don't like about yourself or some things that you'd like to improve upon. Like that's your self-concept today. And then if you think about another circle where I ask you to think about the person that you want to be. And so there's probably going to be some overlap between who you feel you are today and who you want to be. But most of us, especially Stella, anybody listening to your show, I know is going to be focused on their own growth. And so they're always going to be looking for like, oh, I want to improve in these ways. I want to grow in this way. Like there's almost always a gap between who we are today and like where we're wanting to go. And so how much these two circles overlap, the self-concept, who I am and who I want to be, you can think about that overlap as really representing your self-esteem. Because that's like, well, how do I feel about who I am today?
Oh my gosh.
But self-acceptance is more nuanced than that, because self-acceptance says whatever gap exists, because there's always a gap, right? Do you have a gap? Like, are there things that you want to improve about yourself?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So self-acceptance looks at the gap between who you are and who you want to be, not as evidence that you're not enough, but rather as simply the direction that you want to go. And so where a lot of people will look at who they are today and who they want to be, and they look at that gap and they feel like crap about it, and they feel like that's evidence of their inadequacies and their unworthiness, and they beat themselves up about it, and the inner critic is, you know, raging in their ear. Like that is lower self-acceptance. But the ability to look at that and say, I feel okay. And I use the word okay when I talk about acceptance, like versus self-love. I am okay with who I am right now. All my flaws and imperfections and all my talents and strengths. When I'm okay with who I am right now, that is self-acceptance. Yeah. And it in no way, and I know that you know this, it in no way means that I'm not going to grow and get better. Like this is one of the things that blew my mind. Because when I first heard about self-acceptance as a concept, I really wanted to reject it. Because it sounded to me like giving up, becoming complacent. You know, I was like, what? Because I was like, isn't that the opposite? Self-acceptance and self-improvement, aren't they opposites? And I see a lot of high achievers today that believe that too. And then when I learned about paradox theory, and that was one of the examples of like, oh, so self-acceptance and self-improvement, they're not opposites. They're not even the same dimension. They're actually two different dimensions, like you were saying in your intro. Because the opposite of self-acceptance isn't self-improvement. The opposite of self-acceptance is self-judgment. So that means that you can choose to focus on your self-improvement through a self-judging lens, which is where I think a lot of high achievers hang out. Yeah. I am still there sometimes. You know, perfectionist tendencies, hard driving, strong inner critic, hard to accept compliments, right? Or I can focus on self-improvement from a self-accepting lens. And research is actually really clear that I'm going to grow faster and put more of my energy into my growth when I am approaching my growth from the self-accepting lens versus self-judging. So this paradox theory, like, totally blew my mind. And that's part of what we based the quiz on. that you
Oh,
took
yeah.
a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
right? So the self-acceptance quiz, if any of your listeners are curious about it, they can just go to selfacceptancequiz.com. We tried to make it as easy as possible. It only took you what, like 3 or 4 minutes maybe?
It was quick, yeah.
Yeah, so fast. And then you get your results right away. So you'll get like a report, it's a few pages. And it's just designed to say, hey, based on how you've answered these items today, here's where you fall on this 2x2. So you can be either high or low on self-acceptance, high or low on self-improvement. And then you're going to get some coaching emails as a follow-up to help you see what are some things that you can start to do or shift today, like tangible, practical things, so that if you want to move more into that upper right quadrant where you're high on self-improvement and high on self-acceptance, you can get there. And that's where you were, right? You were in that flowing and growing. And I was like, that makes so much sense.
I was very honored.
It took you work, right? Did it take you work to get there?
Yeah,
like over the
sure.
course of your life?
And I think it's really interesting. Just, you have to, I think, put a lot of effort into learning and focusing on self-acceptance, because when you are already into self-improvement and yeah, like being a high achiever, being a perfectionist, that's very rewarded by society. And like growing up as a kid, like if you're a high achieving student, you're praised for it. So
oh yeah,
the negatives of that, like burnout and stress and all the, internal battles that go on, that's not really talked about. I think probably it is more now. But yeah, it's very interesting to learn, oh, this isn't healthy and this isn't ultimately benefiting me. And
there's
like,
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, like you said, there's I don't have to do the opposite. It's like you mentioned, like I don't have to become complacent and not work hard or feel successful in order to balance that out.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so much unlearning.
Yes,
like
exactly.
I love what you're pulling on, Stella, because that's exactly what it is. I think that so many high achievers get that positive attention and praise, and they start to form a belief in their minds that they are worthy of love if, right? Or they're worthy of attention if. And so the underlying fear is actually really, really dark and awful, which is that they are not just inherently worthy, and that if they are falling short, or if they are not the best, if they don't hit the goal the first time out, that there's something kind of fundamentally wrong with them and they're like broken. And that belief is actually so painful that the psychological immune system suppresses it. It pushes it down. It doesn't actually let that exist in your conscious mind for the most part. But then all these other crazy things start to happen because you're still trying to justify and explain like why things don't feel good. Or like you're talking about, you start to burn yourself out because you just don't think that you're going to be an acceptable version of a human being if you're not at the very, very best. And yeah, it's brutal. And I know in one of your recent episodes, you were talking about like all of the different negative outcomes of like leaning too much into perfectionism, right? You procrastinate, you don't move forward. Like I was exactly like I heard you describing on that episode, Stella. Like I did not think that I could be a perfectionist because it was so easy for me to see what was wrong with my own stuff.
Yeah,
and I literally wrote a blog about that several years ago because I was like, well, I'm not perfect, so how can I be a perfectionist?
Yeah, literally, exactly.
It was so funny listening to you. I was like, this could be me. Like this could be me.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that there are so many of us out there that like this resonates with. And so, in the work that I do, the biggest step that feels the most important to me is actually getting high achievers to recognize that self-acceptance isn't just an okay thing to practice on or to practice doing in your life, but that it's probably the single most important thing you can do to improve the quality of your life and actually enhance your growth. Like you're actually going to grow faster. You're going to learn faster when you can let go of the self-judgment and replace it with more self-accepting statements, more self-compassion, right? Giving yourself that grace.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I think I probably mentioned it in that episode, but I just always think of, a really famous person or a very successful person that maybe looks like they have it all, but because they've been on that track of just maybe working hard or not balancing things out with self-acceptance, but rather just the the work and the moving forward. It's like you could have it all and still, suffer a lot mentally, internally, and
Yeah.
not have a happy ending because
Yeah.
so it's really about building that foundation.
It's huge because the other thing that happens with really high achieving people who have not built up a self-acceptance practice, when they get to that state, they feel empty inside.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're always blown away by it. But I would invite your listeners to reflect on this if they haven't already. Like, think about a time when you maybe unknowingly lied to yourself by thinking like, well, once this happens, once this external milestone is achieved, then I'm going to feel like I'm enough. Then I'm going to feel like I can, I deserve to relax. Then I can make more room for fun in my life. And then you hit that milestone. It came, right? But you didn't actually feel enough. That empty feeling or that feeling of inadequacy persisted. And then you lie to yourself again and you're like, well, but now if I get to this point, and it's a lie over and over again. And so sometimes people have these incredibly impressive accomplishments. They're widely admired. And to your point, they still feel like, okay, but now what? Mm-hmm. There's a quote from Jim Carrey. I'm a huge fan of Jim Carrey. I fully intend to meet him one day. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I expect it will happen. Where he says, I wish everybody could become rich and famous so that they would realize it's not the answer. Mm-hmm. And I just like that nails it. I think he's spot on. I don't consider myself rich or famous, certainly not Jim Carrey level, but I believe him. Like I believe him so much. And so if you are not building a self-acceptance practice and working on that relationship with yourself and giving yourself that compassion and that grace, then all the improvement in the world is never going to actually help you to feel what you truly want to feel on the inside.
Yeah.
Which is really all that matters.
100%. It's just crazy how much it affects literally every aspect of your life. Like the whole, like everything. It's not just kind of like, oh, I'll do this fun self-love quest. It's like literally every aspect.
Everything. I know. I always say like, this sounds hyperbolic and it's not. I talk about self-acceptance as the key to making everything in your life easier. Mm-hmm. And it's true. It's not just like marketing language. Like literally everything is easier. One of my favorite things to connect for people is actually the relationship between stress and self-acceptance, right? So this is the point where I'm usually really glad that nobody can throw anything at me because I start out by saying that stress is actually a choice. And I'm just projecting onto the world when I'm like, don't throw anything at me because I was mad the first time I heard that. I did not want to believe that. Like I felt like I was being blamed for feeling stressed out or like I responded really badly to it. I wanted to feel like, no, of course everybody would feel stressed out right now. Like, don't make this my fault. Yeah. But you can look at this at so many levels. On the surface level, sure, if I am running my own business and I'm a mom and I'm a leader in my community and I also want to have a spotless house and like a perfectly landscaped yard and trying to do all these things myself, sure, I can look at the surface level choices like, well, what am I choosing to do in my life that's, leading me to feel stressed out? But it goes so much deeper than that because the other truth here is that there is no inherent stressor. There is no one stressor that everybody on the planet is going to agree, yes, that would stress me out. Literally, even like it's the apocalypse. You're going to find plenty of people who are going to be perfectly at peace because they believe in something beyond this physical dimension and they're going to be like, okay, right? So like there's nothing that everybody will find equally stressful, which means that stress is actually just a subjective response. It's a personal experience that we have. And it's based on the meaning we are putting on what's happening, not based on what's actually happening.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? It's like this introspective activity all of a sudden to be like, okay, so what meaning am I putting on what's happening? A simple one would be, oh, I'm stressed out. I have too much to do. Okay. Common, right? Yeah. Too much to do. But what is the meaning that you're putting on that then? It might be something like, well, I guess I'm thinking I'm going to let somebody down, or I'm going to have to submit subpar work, or I'm going to have to stay up so late that I'll compromise my sleep, or I have to miss my kid's ballet recital, or like what? Like, what is the meaning? You're putting some meaning on it. But then you want to go even one layer deeper than that and say, what does that then say about you? So if at the simplest level, the meaning you're putting on the situation, which is causing your stress response, is I might let somebody down. Okay, so check in with yourself. Who are you if you let somebody down? Like, you've got an inner critic in there that's like, you don't want to be that person. You can't be that person that lets somebody down, right? That is the thing that's actually causing the stress. And it's that self-judgment, that self-criticism that's causing the stress reaction. And a lot of high achievers, including me back in the day when I was learning this, I was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you judge yourself for that? Like, that sucks, right? Letting people down, like, you should judge yourself for it. Right? I was like, I was so stubborn when I was learning this. I was a very resistant learner. And then I was like, I came to learn, and it took me longer than I want to admit, that
journey.
Okay, wait, right? Journey. I don't have to judge myself for it. I can offer myself grace and compassion. Am I the only person in the world who has overcommitted and maybe needs to renegotiate a deadline? Sure, that's not true, right? If I do let somebody down, am I fundamentally broken as a human being? Right? Like, you gotta check yourself, because your subconscious is telling yourself this horrible, dark untruth about you. And that's actually what's causing the stress response. So when you have higher self-acceptance, you will not experience life as nearly as stressful.
My mind is a little blown. I've never heard it broken down like that.
Yeah, it was huge for me, like mind blowing. And I think I wanted to throw up. I was like, oh, man.
There's so much to unpack here.
I know. And this is why I love, I love doing this work, because it's literally life-changing. Like, this stuff has changed my life, and I'm still actively working, like you said, still on my journey of uncovering new ways that I still want to practice self-acceptance, new levels of my own self-judgment. But it's so rewarding. It can be hard at first, but once you feel the payoffs, it's everything.
Yeah. What are some, I know you mentioned when people take the quiz, they'll get an email with some tips and tricks and practical ways to maybe start their journey.
Yes.
So what are some of the things, just generally speaking, that either you did or that you now recommend?
So I'll start with the simplest one that was the most impactful for me, which is a practice called taking credit. I learned this from a mentor of mine named Judy Bell, and it's not about stealing credit. So if anybody listening is, in a leadership role, I'm not talking about like taking credit for work that other people have done or stealing credit of your team or anything like that. But most people who are high on self-improvement but lower on self-acceptance are constantly focused on the gap, and they don't acknowledge the gain. And so taking credit is a practice that you can do every single day, where you acknowledge yourself for something that you've done that is progress. And I'll use this example. Like, I think it was 11 years ago. I wasn't really ever a runner. I think I did like sprinting and track when I was 10, but I was not really a runner. And I'm in my like early 30s at that point. I think I was dating a boy and he was a runner, and I was like, oh, I can be a runner. Wonderful reason to take something up. Yeah. But I was like, I'm going to go run 3 miles. And I ran out into the neighborhood, and I was about 0.8 miles in, and my legs were burning, and I was wheezing, and I was cramping so badly. And I was like, oh, I think I'm done. Like, I don't, 3 miles is not happening. And so the typical sort of perfectionist overachiever version of me would have been like, that was ridiculous. I wanted to go 3 miles. I didn't make it 1. God, what is wrong with you? Right? Like, all of that really negative self-talk could just be right there at the surface, and probably would make me like not want to do it again. Be like, never mind. Running's enough for me. I'll do something else. Taking credit would be saying, you know what? I take credit for getting out there and running 0.8 miles, because that's 0.8 miles more than I ran yesterday. And you can do this, and you're building, it's like building muscle. Like I mentioned earlier, that idea of building a muscle. It's going to feel new if you've not ever developed a self-acceptance practice. And some people have, and they don't know that's what they're doing. But if you're so used to beating up on yourself, actually acknowledging yourself, taking credit for something is going to feel really strange. Not a good reason not to do it. Do it anyway.
Yeah.
And there's nothing too small to take credit for. And you're going to build the muscle. So the more you do it, the easier it's going to feel. And the more you're going to be able to see all the different ways actually that you've made plenty of gains. And there's lots of things to take credit for. And the fact that you've made mistakes along the way or haven't always reached your goals is not a reason to not acknowledge yourself for exactly where you are right now.
I love that. And that's easy to do in the sense of you could like do that. Anyone listening could do that today pretty realistically.
Yes. Right now.
Like maybe
Absolutely.
not easy to fully, think of the things mentally, but like practically speaking.
It's a very practical thing. You could do it right now. Write it down if you can. I love the idea of finding an accountability buddy, somebody that you can do this with. Maybe somebody else that you know that can be kind of hard on themselves too. And, you could just do it in spoken form or like text or Slack if it's a coworker or something like that. And when you do it every day, it really does get easier. And I will say this about it too. When it feels the hardest to do is the most important time to do it.
Classic.
Right? Like it really is
truth.
like that moment. And I have been there. Like we do Take Credit Tuesday in my team in Slack. And there are some days where I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm struggling to think of what to take credit for, which is absurd. That reflecting back over a whole day or a whole week, like I'm struggling. But that's a signal to me that like, okay, maybe I'm experiencing a little self-acceptance dip right now. There's an insecurity that's coming up for me. So this is the most important time for me to be able to do this like little push-up, right? And build that muscle and let myself feel good about something that I have progressed on.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So that is a great tangible step for sure. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you recommend people do when we do catch ourselves having that perfectionist kind of self-talk or beating ourselves up over anything?
Yes, definitely. So I'll talk for a second about the relationship between self-acceptance and self-awareness. So most of us can identify that inner critic voice. Right? You know what yours sounds like. Mm-hmm. So imagine for a moment that somebody in your life came to talk to you and they were letting you know about like they made a mistake or something. And imagine that you spoke to them the way that your inner critic has talked to you in the past. Right? Like just sort of imagine that conversation. It's pretty cringy. Like when I think about it, it's like, ooh, I wouldn't want to talk to somebody else like that. And the reason you don't want to talk to somebody else like that is because if you do, is that person more likely to come talk to you again or less likely to come talk to you again?
Less.
They're less likely, right? They're not going to want to come back and talk to you. And the same thing happens in your own mind, right? So when you are really harshing on yourself a lot and you have an unchecked inner critic, that's actually what's going to lead you to be even more self-deceived and less self-aware. You're going to start to hide things about yourself where there's like a ton of judgment and criticism because your inner critic is going to rage too hard. So that's the relationship that exists between self-acceptance and self-awareness. So when you do notice that the inner critic is speaking up, this is where you want to apply the same kind of like, how would I talk to somebody else kind of concept? Because think about it this way. Your inner critic wants what's best for you. She really does. Everything that she's saying, she's wanting to help. And most of you probably know somebody who's kind of like that. Like, if you've worked with somebody like this, like they want to help, but they're kind of just like always pointing out the problems, or they're always complaining, or they're like really fear driven, Chicken Little or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you try to ignore them, or you try to push them out, or you simply try to argue with them for whatever it is they're saying, they're usually going to just kind of keep coming at you. And that's what the inner critic does. So you don't actually want to resist the inner critic. And this is what's so counterintuitive. You want to actually lean into it, because what you resist persists. So listen, hold space. Ask your inner critic, what is it that you want me to know right now? And this might sound weird, right? But like engage in this inner dialogue with yourself and say, what is it that you want me to know right now? Because your inner critic is going to tell you probably with like an edgy tone to their voice, but they're going to tell you what they're worried about, right? Like, well, I just don't want you to go embarrass yourself. Well, I just want you to know that you might be running out of money. I just want you to know, right? Like they're going to be saying things that might not be fun to hear, but they're just having their own little freak out. And if you actually listen to your inner critic, hear them out, and I'm doing that in air quotes, like hear them out, just keep saying, okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Anything else? It's like taking the wind out of the sails. And so that's part of it. And I will sometimes talk about like this goofy conversation that you can have in your head between like your inner critic and your inner champion, right? Because the inner champ, we all have the inner champion. That's the one that takes credit. That's the one that celebrates. That's the one that actually accepts compliments or praise when they come in. But usually that voice is not quite as loud as the critic. And so if you try to get the champion to fight the critic, it's not going to work. She going to win.
Yeah.
Critic is a much better fighter than the champion. So you want the champion to actually do what the champion does best, which is champion. So offer appreciation. Don't get mad at the inner critic. Actually thank the inner critic. You know, mine, it was a conversation that sounds sort of like from the champion. She would say, hey, I just want to say, I think you do a lot to really help Laura out. And I think that's great. Like you caught that typo in the email before she sent that. That would have been so embarrassing. And that's awesome. Thank you for helping her like that. Right. And the critic is like, oh, yeah, thanks. It kind of softens, right? And then the champion can maybe appreciate something else and say, you know, I also have some ways that I think I can help Laura. Do you think it'd be okay if I speak up too sometimes? And the critic's like, yeah, okay, that sounds good. And you start to create this more collaborative relationship that exists between the inner critic and the inner champion, which is that upper right quadrant where you scored on your assessment, Stella, on the self-acceptance quiz, right? Where you are using what's helpful from the inner critic, which is here's areas where I can grow and improve, but it's not delivered with the edgy tone that makes you think that you're fundamentally broken because it's in collaboration with the champion who says, hey, you've got plenty to feel good about. We can absolutely, I'll make sure to set an agenda next time because you're right. We spent too much time on that first topic and we ran out of time to talk about this critical thing. That's a valuable learning, right? Instead of like, God, why did I screw that up again? It sucks. You know?
Yeah.
So totally counterintuitive, but like be actually really friendly to your critic. Be friendly, lean in, listen, appreciate her, and she will actually calm down. It's wild.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So what are the other, I know you mentioned the upper right in the quiz is flowing and growing, correct?
That's
so
right.
what are the other three?
So the other one that's probably the most common that I see is somebody that's going to be lower on self-acceptance, but still high on self-improvement. And that's pushing but pressured.
Ooh.
So that's somebody that's like, they're always striving, they're always looking for that next thing, but the pressure that they feel is because they are at the deepest level of self, internalizing, you know, the little mistakes along the way, the little failures, and they're striving forward from a place of fear. They're striving forward from the place of, am I not enough right now? Thinking that this external achievement is going to get them somewhere. And so, yeah, that's some place where a lot of my high achievers hang out. The other two, your listeners might score there, but I find it to be less common because people that are listening to podcasts are pretty high on self-improvement.
Yeah.
Unless they're just really, really hard on themselves and they don't score themselves high on self-improvement, even if they are high on self-improvement. But in the bottom right, you might have somebody occasionally, this is the rarest of them all, I think, where you're high on self-acceptance and low on self-improvement. This is every high achiever's fear. This is the like complacent quadrant.
Yeah.
This is what high achievers think is going to happen if they accept themselves. They are thinking that they're going to become like a lump on a log and not do anything to get any better, that if they are not beating themselves up, then they'll stop growing and improving. And that's what you could consider that quadrant to be, is that more complacent area where you're just like, I'm good. There's nothing for me to learn or grow, but I'm at peace with myself. But it's not common because when you're high on self-acceptance, you are almost always striving to grow and improve, not from fear, but just from like love.
Yeah.
and desire to have a positive impact in the world. And because learning can be really fun and because growth can be so rewarding, right? So it's all of like the positive drivers. And then the bottom left is where you're going to see that people are low on both self-acceptance and self-improvement. And this is usually probably just a moment in time for somebody and not someplace where they're hanging out in perpetuity. This can feel a little bit more like wandering or sort of at a standstill, because here in this lower left quadrant, you're being pretty hard on yourself, but you're also not taking steps to really shift in terms of growth. You're not working to improve. And so some of the most important steps to take there is to actually be so freaking kind to yourself. That's the time to give yourself the most compassion and the most grace, which is going to slide you up on that self-acceptance scale and will naturally turn into you wanting to learn and grow and improve.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you say it's not permanent.
Not at all.
I think it can really feel forever when you are feeling that way. So hopefully that is reassuring to anyone who may be going through that at this time.
Yeah. It's almost always moment in time. And, I tell people about the quiz, which is, again, just selfacceptancequiz.com if your listeners want to take it. It can change. It can totally change depending on what's going on for you in your life in any given moment. How good you feel about yourself for a lot of us is dependent typically on how things are going, even who we're with. But the ultimate goal is, what if it didn't depend on what's going on in your life? What if it didn't depend on who you're with? What if you chose to feel good or okay with who you are right now, regardless of what's going on in your life? That is the ultimate goal. That is somebody that is unflappable. That is somebody who does not personalize somebody else's behavior, but also doesn't just reject them or push them out, right? They are able to see other people's behaviors about them, not about me. I'm not going to personalize it, but I can see they're in pain, so I'm offering them compassion, right? This is like sainthood kind of, right? Where you are just okay with yourself, even with setbacks, even with failures, even with rejection. And so it's knowing yourself and having so much fluidity in your identity, your self-concept, that like you kind of can't get knocked down. It's sort of like those, those things they have at like car dealerships, the things that blow around, even if it looks like they get knocked down, like they're right back up.
Yeah.
Like you can't knock them down. And I think that's my goal, is to help as many people as possible move into that upper right quadrant and stay there, even when they are going through hard times in life.
I love that. My last question for you, which we kind of touched on with the giving yourself credit, but I guess a little more personal to you, is what daily habits keep you connected to self-acceptance?
So one thing that I will confess, I actually don't do this every day, but when I do it, it's very powerful, is forgiveness.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and I can find something every single day to forgive myself for. Every day. I could, if I was practicing it every day. I probably am down to like almost a weekly cadence of doing it. But when you practice forgiving yourself every single day for something, just one thing, what's one thing you want to forgive yourself for? Did you not floss last night before bed? Right? Did you have like a little edge in your voice when your significant other asked you an innocent question about like dinner, right? And you're like, oh, I shouldn't be like that. Like, find at least one thing that you were self-critical for, judging yourself for, and practice forgiveness to yourself for that one thing.
That's very powerful. And is it more like thinking, or do you journal? Would you recommend people like journal about that?
Journaling is always going to be more powerful than simply thinking something, because the process of taking something and moving it actually out of your body and existence and onto a page is extremely powerful. Another one you can do, which for me evoked so much emotion in the beginning, is say it out loud to yourself in the mirror.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spooky.
Like, right? Just think about that, like standing in front of the mirror and looking directly at yourself and saying, I forgive myself for, and then fill in the blank. And take note where you feel it in your body. Like, it brings up a lot for people. You can have, huge heart swells. You can have sort of like the gut wrenching. Some people have like tears immediately form, just because there's so much like self judgment and self criticism that's held in all the time. And often that's what we're just looking for, is that forgiveness, that permission to be imperfect. But if you're able to give that to yourself and you're not dependent on other people, once again, you get to that level of like unflappable, or can I say a curse word?
Yes.
Or should I not?
You should,
Unfuckwithable. Unfuckwithable. Right? Like, that is the ultimate dream. Be like, you cannot fuck with me no matter what. I'm unfuckwithable.
Yes. Well, on that note, that really sealed the deal for me. Just kidding.
Nice.
But yeah, it has been so great talking with you. I'm just so happy that, we found each other and that we're able to have this conversation. I just appreciate all your insights and intelligence and compassion so much. I know you mentioned the quiz website that people can go to, which I definitely recommend you guys should. I did. It was great. But is there anywhere else that people can connect with you and learn more if they wish?
Yeah, I think the best place besides the quiz would actually just be on LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn quite a bit, like almost every day, I would say. And if you want to connect, just tell me that you heard me here on Stella's show. And if any questions come up for you or whatever, I'd be really happy to connect.
Yes. Love that. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening, everyone.